Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to look at how some of history's biggest catastrophes weren't caused by some brilliant evil plan, but by just colossal human mistakes. We're talking about those moments when things went so spectacularly wrong, they actually changed the world. Okay, so let's just dive right in with one of the absolute weirdest friendly fire incidents in all of military history. Seriously, this story sounds like it was made up for a dark comedy sketch, but the consequences? They were tragically real. So picture this, it's 1788. You've got this massive Austrian army, about 100,000 strong, and they're looking for the Ottoman army, over in what's now Romania. An advanced team of soldiers finds some locals who are willing to sell them schnapps. The soldiers, of course, buy the booze and start drinking. But then, another group of their own guys shows up and, well, they want in on the party. And this is where a tiny, stupid argument just explodes into total chaos. In the dark, someone fires a shot, then someone else yells, "Turks, Turks." Now you have to remember, this army was a mix of different nationalities, so tons of soldiers couldn't understand each other. Panic just rips through the camp. When the German-speaking officers start screaming, "Halt, halt," which means stop, many of the other soldiers hear Allah, Allah, and think the Ottoman attack is real. That's when their own artillery just opens fire on their own men. The result was a complete and utter disaster. When the real Ottoman army showed up 2 days later, they weren't met with a ready-to-fight force. No. They found over 1,000 dead and wounded Austrian soldiers. The Austrians had completely taken themselves out, and the Ottomans took the town without firing a single shot. So that unbelievable story shows how simple confusion can just spiral into a total catastrophe. But not all mistakes are that chaotic. So let's explore 3 specific types of world-changing blunders, starting with one where a powerful belief pushed an entire society right to the edge. All right, our first big blunder is what you might call a mistake of deadly belief. This is a case where a spiritual prophecy, one that was filled with so much hope, convinced an entire people to commit an act of mass self-destruction, all in the face of crushing colonial pressure. So back in 1856, in southern Africa, a teenage girl named Nangwa Wuse comes forward with this incredibly powerful message. She said the spirits of their ancestors had a plan to bring about this new golden age. No more colonizers, no more sickness, no more death. The Xhosa people had to do one thing first: slaughter all of their cattle and burn all of their crops. And this message, it just spread like wildfire. And here you can see the just devastating gap between what was promised and what actually happened. Driven by this absolute faith, the Xhosa people killed around 400,000 of their own cattle. But the ancestors, they never came back. The miracle never happened. Instead, a horrific famine swept through, killing 40,000 people and leaving the Xhosa nation so weakened that the very colonizers they wanted to get rid of had an easier time taking over. Let's move on to our next case. And you'll see how this builds, because this mistake wasn't fueled by faith, but by the ego, and just the sheer arrogance of one of the most famous generals in all of history. Of course, I'm talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. By 1812, Napoleon basically felt like he was on top of the world. He wanted Russia to stop trading with his archenemy, Great Britain. So what does he do? He puts together the Grand Armée, and this thing was the largest European army ever seen, nearly 500,000 soldiers. He marches into Russia expecting a quick, easy victory. He was dangerously overconfident. You see, Napoleon's arrogance made him totally ignore 2 enemies he just couldn't beat: the massive size of Russia and the iron will of its people. The Russians refused to give him the big, glorious battle he wanted. Instead, they just kept retreating, and as they retreated, they burned their own land, a brutal, scorched earth tactic, to make sure his army couldn't find any supplies. When Napoleon finally got to Moscow, he found it completely empty and on fire. It was a clear message. The Russians would rather destroy their own holy city than surrender it. Trapped by the vicious Russian winter, the Grand Armée had no choice but to retreat across the very same wasteland they'd marched through. Starvation, frostbite, constant attacks, it just wore them down. Of that massive army of nearly 500,000 soldiers, fewer than 120,000 managed to stumble out. Napoleon's image of being invincible, it was shattered for good. Okay, for our last one, let's look at a mistake that wasn't caused by a prophecy or by ego, but by a dangerously wrong idea that was given absolute power. This is the story of Trofim Lysenko and the war on science that happened in the Soviet Union.
Trofim Lysenko was a Soviet biologist who basically just threw mainstream genetics out the window. He believed all sorts of things that had no evidence. For example, he thought if you just exposed wheat seeds to the cold, their offspring would somehow learn to be cold resistant. He also claimed that plants of the same species wouldn't compete with each other, they'd cooperate. None of this, of course, was true.
Now here's the problem. His theories promised these amazing quick fixes to the Soviet Union's food shortages. Because of that, he got the full political backing of the dictator Joseph Stalin. And Lysenko used that power to launch a campaign of terror against real scientists. Anyone who dared to disagree with him was fired, thrown in prison, or in some cases even executed.
So his completely flawed ideas became official state policy. Farmers were forced to use his methods, like planting seeds packed super close together. And the result? Catastrophic crop failures. Lysenko's politically backed pseudoscience led directly to famines that killed millions of people in the Soviet Union, and later in China, which also adopted his crazy ideas.
So after all that, what do these three disasters, a prophecy, an invasion, and a fake science, really tell us about human error? I mean, what's the common thread here? How does a tragic prophecy connect to a failed invasion and a deadly scientific fraud? Well, what's so clear is that these weren't just random accidents. They actually represent these distinct patterns of failure. They show how incredibly powerful forces, like blind faith or an unchecked ego or a political ideology, can completely overwrite reality and lead to just unimaginable suffering. And that leaves us with a final and pretty challenging thought. These stories feel so distant, right? Their mistakes seem so obvious to us now looking back. But if people in the past could be so tragically, massively wrong, what widely held beliefs or celebrated leaders or powerful ideas might we be dangerously wrong about right now?